The pilot had accidentally fallen asleep while flying, but woke up to realize something was wrong. The plane had veered off course over the Pacific, and fuel was running dangerously low. He couldn't tell his passengers the truth, as panicking would only increase the risk of crashing. He needed to quickly contact the tower for help. However, hearing Japanese voices on the radio startled him, so he hurriedly turned off the radio and switched to Morse code to try to establish contact. Next, in order to lighten the plane's weight, the pilot threw the heavy shells from the fighter jet into the Pacific Ocean, then immediately changed course, trying to search for any signals. Unfortunately, after flying back for a full 10 minutes, they still received no response. With the fuel about to run out, the pilot quickly informed his 2 companions in the rear cabin to prepare for an emergency landing on the Pacific. Upon receiving the order, the companions hurriedly gathered their belongings. Although the plane ultimately managed to make an emergency landing on the water, the violent impact had already damaged the cabin. It wouldn't be long before the plane would sink. In this critical moment, the pilot hurriedly left the aircraft, opened the life raft, and immediately called out to his companions for help. To his surprise, when he turned around, he found that the plane had already sunk to the bottom of the sea. Fortunately, at this life or death moment, his companions quickly unfastened their seatbelts, narrowly escaping with their lives. After resurfacing, the 3 of them quickly flipped the raft over, but it was so small that they could only squeeze together upright. They had no idea what kind of ordeal awaited them next, as the night sea breeze was extremely cold. The 3 grown men, soaked to the skin, were shivering from the cold, and could only hug their arms tightly to ward off the chill. Fortunately, they managed to make it through until dawn. To their relief, none of them suffered from frostbite, and when they woke up, they even started playing games as if nothing had happened. They believed that it wouldn't be long before someone came to rescue them, but at that moment, the pilot looked worried, because he knew that this vast Pacific Ocean was full of dangers, and moreover, they had no water or food on their raft. Sure enough, by noon, the 3 of them were parched from the scorching summer sun, with no solution in sight. They had no choice but to take off their clothes to avoid the heat. Only one young man refused to believe in this superstition. Not only did he not avoid the sun, but he also kept his eyes fixed on the fishing hook in his hand. When the fish still wouldn't bite, he got so frustrated that he stripped off his clothes and jumped into the sea to cool off. Seeing this, another companion wanted to jump in for a swim as well, but was immediately stopped by the pilot. The pilot explained that to ensure safety on the Pacific, there must always be at least 2 people on the raft. Hearing this, the young man in the water suddenly felt a chill down his spine, and hurriedly swam back with all his might. For everyone's safety, the pilot suggested that no one should go near the edge of the raft, to avoid attracting the attention of sharks lurking below. And so the group drifted on the sea for a full 3 days. Without a single drop of water to drink, the experienced pilot finally couldn't hold out any longer, and ended up using his shoe to scoop up some seawater to drink. The next day, after waking up, the pilot's spirits had somewhat recovered, but his companion's conditions were getting worse and worse. One of them even started hallucinating, mistaking the seawater for mineral water, and was about to drink it. Fortunately, the pilot stopped him just in time. In this way, the 3 of them drifted for several more days. Then, the pilot was suddenly surprised to find a pencil in his pocket. His companions didn't think it was a big deal, but the pilot believed the pencil could be very useful. He drew a few straight lines on his swimsuit, then took out a compass to estimate the approximate location of the crash. Based on his calculations, the pilot believed that now, as long as they kept drifting southwest, they would soon reach a small island where their allies were stationed. But how could they control the direction of the boat? At that moment, the pilot had a sudden inspiration. He quickly used some wire to prop up a life jacket, then threw the life jacket behind the raft. In the end, they successfully created a makeshift rudder to control the direction of the raft, which immediately gave everyone a glimmer of hope, because in just a few days, they could be saved. Over the next few days, they took turns keeping watch day and night, steering the boat. It was as if their will to survive had moved the heavens. That night, with nothing to eat, how much longer could they survive in the world's largest ocean? They had already been drifting on the Pacific for 5 days when suddenly, one of the men pulled out a knife and started stabbing the small boat. The officer, seeing this, thought he had gone mad, but the young man said there seemed to be something in the water. The officer quickly rushed over to help, only to discover that his companion had caught a shark. To prevent the shark from escaping, they held onto its body tightly while the companion desperately stabbed the shark's belly with the knife. After a chaotic struggle, the shark soon stopped moving, and then they cut open its stomach. They pulled out a few small fish from inside and without hesitation, stuffed them into their mouths. This was their first meal since being stranded in the Pacific for 5 days. After filling their stomachs, they stuffed the remaining fish meat into their socks to eat slowly over the coming days. Finally, they began cleaning the bloodstains from the boat, unaware that this action would bring them a huge disaster. Because sharks are extremely sensitive to the smell of blood, their small boat was soon surrounded by a group of sharks. Seeing this, the officer immediately told his companions not to go near the edge of the boat, or they could easily be attacked by the sharks. In this way, the group managed to hold out until nightfall. At this moment, One of the young men, having just woken up, seemed to have forgotten the officer's warning. He reached out his hand to wash his face, and in the next second, his hand was bitten by a shark. Because it was too dark at night, the officer could only give his companion a simple bandage. The days passed one by one, and soon it was their 15th day stranded in the Pacific. During these days, they ate fish when they were hungry and drank fish water when they were thirsty. Fortunately, the young man's bitten hand did not become infected. In order to leave this dangerous sea area as soon as possible, they prayed to God every day, hoping that one day the rescue team would find them. But Shiyu thought no one had discovered them at all. One day, a companion suddenly picked up the pistol. The officer asked him what he was trying to do, and it turned out he had just spotted a seagull. After watching the seagull get shot and sent flying dozens of meters away, the officer immediately jumped into the sea to retrieve it. Unexpectedly, just as he picked up the seagull's corpse, a shark, attracted by the smell of blood, began to slowly swim toward him. Seeing this, the officer quickly swam back toward the boat and finally managed to climb back aboard before the shark could bite him. Afterward, they started eating the seagull's meat. At that moment, the young man suddenly thought of something. If there were birds appearing, didn't that mean they weren't far from land? But his guess was quickly dismissed by the officer. The officer explained that seagulls are extremely capable flyers, able to travel from the South Pole to the North Pole in just over 20 days. They had already been drifting on the Pacific Ocean for 30 days. The prolonged lack of water had left all three of them gravely ill, constantly drowsy, but reality forced them to struggle to their feet. With exhausted arms, they rowed the small boat, always hoping that one day they would return to land. However, reality was harsh. A few days later, not only did hope fail to arrive, but they were also hit by a violent storm. The three of them quickly took off their clothes to collect water, thinking they could finally store up a good amount. Unexpectedly, the sky suddenly filled with dark clouds. The experienced officer immediately recognized this as a sign of an approaching hurricane and hurriedly called his companions to get up. He told his companions to hold on tightly to the boat, and sure enough, the next second a huge wave crashed down, instantly sweeping the officer into the sea. Fortunately, the officer managed to swim desperately back to the boat, but before they could catch their breath, another towering wave struck them. Even though they clung to the small boat with all their might, in the end, they were still thrown into the sea by the massive wave, and all their food was lost. The officer then struggled to swim back to the surface, and luckily, he soon made it back to the side of the boat. But at that moment, they realized that one of their companions was missing. They shouted themselves hoarse, and finally spotted him behind the boat, where they clung to the boat with their hands for dear life. The officer suggested using the waves to flip the boat. They pushed together and finally righted it to climb back on. Huddled together, they endured the long night. By dawn, they were near collapse, lying hopelessly and waiting for death. Suddenly, a companion spotted an island ahead. He woke the others, and seeing it was real, they wept for joy and paddled desperately toward it. So, on their 30th day, stranded in the Pacific,